item is still outstanding. Are there any additional items you want to add to this agenda? Okay. Hearing none, we're going to move forward, and now it's time for a brief introduction conversation about the MLP Chugach deal. Ms. Henderson.
Good morning, Anna Henderson, General Manager of Municipal Light and Power. For you, last time, I forget the time frame now, but didn't have testimony from the interveners. That just came out this last Friday. The rate, the acquisition docket in front of the RCA. Lots of testimony. Providence's testimony consists of over 100 pages, not including exhibits. We have the Federal Executive Agency, about 30 pages, but also some exhibits. So we're still in the process of going through that, formulating our strategy and how to respond. And I can't go too deep into that with you guys because it's pending and it will be made public when we draft our testimony. But I can relay the general feelings from the Providence and FDA testimony that they're not opposing the deal, but they want changes to it. And that testimony is publicly available, so I can, through Barbara, provide you guys a link if that's something that you desire. So we're working through that. We have a very short window, only 3 weeks before we have to file our response, which will be due August 2nd. And we go to hearing. I might butcher the date, but I believe it's August 27th. So it's all happening very fast and coming pretty quickly. So that's all I really have. And then, of course, the integration efforts are ongoing, and we're working on that daily.
How, practically speaking, would changes actually be made to the deal, right? Because we did a plebiscite. We went to the people of Anchorage with fairly specific. This is parameters. This is what we are doing. The people of Anchorage said yes. Then we had extensive work sessions of public testimony, then passed a law to sort of codify that. So how do you, after all of that, go back and alter the deal in a meaningful way?
Not something that will be weighing on both sides. We're going to be collaborating with Chugach in order to develop a strategy, so our testimonies will be coordinated. But that's something that they'll have to consider throughout the process of what we actually have the ability to, or what the, again, I don't want to give away my strategy and my game plan.
If I might, is it fair to say that when that time comes, they'll come before us with a clear proposal, even if it's an executive session at some point, so we understand it?
I believe that is fair to the extent that it rises to that level. Some of it may be fairly mundane that we could potentially just deal with. But I would defer to Bill and on that as far as what they
technical versus
to come before this body. But certainly anything that would modify what you specifically approved would have to come before you. But at this point, we're not agreeing to modify anything, and that's the point of the testimony. Is they've made their arguments. Now we're going to propose our counter arguments, and we'll see where the commission ends up. I don't.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, Providence has got 100 pages plus exhibits. What's their main argument? Are they coming out against the merger? Against the buyout?
No, they're not. They're not opposed, but they do want changes before they're willing to support it. So one of the big asks, from my perspective, is that they want to tie the recovery and rates of the acquisition premium to actual savings over time. So what they're proposing would be an annual report from Chugach documenting the savings, and then the offsetting or the acquisition premium associated with that savings on an annual basis would be recoverable at that point. That's obviously something that we're going to have to argue against. I don't see that that's tenable, but again, I can't give too much of my strategy.
Thank you.
Anything else from the members? Good. Does Chugach want to speak?
Well, I just wanted to, Julie Haskett, we haven't been here in a few meetings, so if you guys have any questions of us, as Anna talked about, we're doing a ton of integration planning with ML&P. We had 20,000 hours that resulted in a work plan for how to bring the two utilities together. Now we're working on implementing that plan. together. So a lot of work's going on. In addition to what everyone's doing to get ready for the RCA, there's going to be 6 weeks of hearings in August and September. And so the regulatory folks are very busy while we're doing the other work plan and cultural integration. Again, our goal, day one, is to have as seamless as possible transition for members, for customers. So that's what it's all about, is making that go well for everybody. So a lot of work's going on as we wait for this decision from the RCA, which so far they indicated will come by mid-November. So that's what we're all working toward.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any questions? And just for the record, Ms. Kennedy has arrived. And I would add that there is an item also on the agenda that could have been on our committee agenda for the meeting on Tuesday. It's 9D7, and it is a, 9D6 and 499-2019, which is additional funding to support the acquisition. And so that's also a pending matter on this item. So, any other questions on you guys? MLP? No. All right, then next we are going to move into the second item on the agenda, which is the introduction of a couple of items and conversation about them relating to the stormwater utility. And Ms. LaFrance is, this is in her wheelhouse. This is going to be her project to chair, but she's out of town right now. Suzanne, did you want to begin this conversation at all, or just let us dive in with staff?
Thanks, Mr. Constant. I'd say just go ahead and dive in at this point because my connection is a little bit sketchy.
All right. So, but again, this is Ms. LaFrance's project to lead us through, and when she's back, she'll be taking over. And so, Ms. Christina.
All right, so I got about a dozen slides I'm going to go over with you with regards to the stormwater utility and an update. Really, the intention is for some of the newer members and just a refresher of why we're doing it, where the status is at, and then why there's 2 ordinances on the table for the Assembly approval on, I think it's the August 6th, or August, whatever the next Assembly meeting is in August. Okay, so first, what is a stormwater utility? You know, it's just like, it's a public utility is what we're proposing, just like a water utility, an electric utility, gas utility. It's a legal entity that provides the services that are important, such as management, financing and building, planning, engineering, regulatory, permitting, maintenance, and capital improvements. All this stuff to run a sustainable business so you can sustain your service on what those utilities are providing. Well, at the last time we met in April, I think everyone got a copy of the January 2019 Stormwater Utility Report. So I'm going to kind of summarize the key findings and recommendations of that. Was the intent of the stormwater utility is to provide a mechanism for cohesive drainage management and coordination in eliminating the shifting of drainage problems from one location to another. Essentially, if you read the report, what it says is you got a lot of different drainage management entities. You got MOA, you got DOT, you got the LURSAs, VERSAs, and you got nobody at all in some places, quite frankly. So the drainage problems shift from one person to another without cohesive management. It's just a finger pointing game, and it can raise flooding issues, water quality issues, so on and so forth. So that the intent of a single entity managing that is one of the first bullet points. It also provides a dedicated revenue source for stormwater management, maintenance, and capital improvements. This is an important feature. Weddleton grilled me on last time and said, you know, really the way it's funded right now is through taxpayers, and there's exempt taxpayers, number one, that contribute to stormwater but don't pay, and the other aspect is the way that those capital improvements particularly are paid for on drainage is through road bonds. Roads and stormwater infrastructure are different. They are tied together, but they don't have the same life, they don't have the same service levels, so there's a reason why you want to have a separate dedicated source. You can survive as is now, but you're just getting by versus being proactive. It also provides equitable distribution of the stormwater costs. As I already said, if you look in the report, there's about 10% of the properties in Anchorage are tax exempt, and those properties may contribute to stormwater drainage problems, but they're not paying for it. So that's an equitable way to make sure that folks that are contributing are paying. The utility provides that.
Excuse me, could you give me just a sampling of who those are contributing or aren't paying?
Yeah, I mean, you look at, a couple things. I'll look at any large parking lot. So if you're a federal government agency, call the airport, for instance, or a big church, any other tax exempt agencies that are out there.
Schools?
They might be. I don't know if they pay. You're right. But so yes, the answer to the question, to what you're leading to, is they will have an additional cost through a stormwater utility that they may not pay now. If they're not providing tax, they're paying in lieu of taxes in the school district, yes, they would fall under that provision where they have an increased cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And then the final bullet was it provides a way to incentivize good stormwater management practice such as green infrastructure. Now this kind of gets back to the climate action plan the Assembly endorsed, and this is important because it minimizes, part of the cost of stormwater utility and drainage is the pipe sizing. So if you can mitigate the size of pipes and what you need by mitigating stormwater runoff by green infrastructure, that helps, and that can reduce costs in the long term. Okay, just a couple pictures. This is kind of a, stormwater infrastructure is real. It's out of sight, not mind though. So here's a road, looks nice. There's a little pothole in the road. Well, actually that pothole's a cavern under the road. What that is a 54-inch storm drain pipe that partially collapsed, and then this is the result. So this is an emergency repair. You're throwing away a lot of metal, which is money, and you're putting in new piping in there to address it, and it's a disruption. So that's a reactionary response versus a proactive response. And it's important for public health and safety to have that infrastructure taken care of. So what's Amy's role? Why am I here? With the report recommending using existing municipal entities to set up the stormwater utility for a variety of reasons, cost efficiencies and scale, and really is the main driver, and resources that are there. Staying up a separate utility it'll be a challenge. We have customer service, finance, billing. We are a utility already. We have water and sewer right now, but this is adding on another water entity in our portfolio, which also brings us to the fact that kind of the national trend is that water and wastewater utilities do pick up the stormwater utilities because it's kind of all integrated in one water. They're all tied together with respect to the water is water, and what you do with one side of the house is they all impact each other. Stormwater addresses groundwater recharge. It also is part of the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, which is part of our wastewater system. A lot of older cities have combined sewers, or wastewater and stormwater both. So they have permanent regulations. We kind of have that with roof drains in some areas and such like that. Point being is it's the biggest reason, honestly, is we are set up to do it. We can do that, but it's a separate booked item. In other words, it's financially we have to account for it separately, but we have the capacity to do this, and so we've really been asked to do that. We're going to start the process. So with that, we are moving on the report recommended, phase 2, basically setting up the utility. In order to do that, we're going to need some seed money, which is what the ordinances get to. There's an RFP on the street, or it's actually, we're in the evaluation phase. So we'll have a consultant. The purpose of the consultant is to get all the information that's required in because it's a publicly regulated utility, there's certain requirements that need to be done, which is submitting a certificate of public convenience and necessity to the RCA. You basically say why you need the utility, what their purpose is. So we're doing that. There's a lot of information involved in that, which I'll get to in the next slides. But bottom line is we need some horsepower to help, which also means money. And I can't use water and wastewater money to do that. It's got to be a separate fund, which ironically it supports the municipality because a lot of the enterprise entities, utilities, if they're MOA owned, they can provide a dividend to the city later on. And you have to be an owner investor. In other words, the municipality needs to put some risk down in order to be an owner investor to get a future potential dividend. And that's kind of where this is at. So the Regulatory Commission of Alaska wants to know on all utilities, key management, benefit to public, service area, utilities practices and procedures. And as Fred brought up last time, what is your service area? Is it Eagle River and Girdwood? Don't know yet. That's what this is going to address because the permit does include Eagle River and Girdwood, the MS4 permit, but it doesn't necessarily mean we will include them in the stormwater utility at this point in time. That will be resolved. Then there's a lot of financial requirements. This is really the meat of it because what it gets to is how much is this going to cost? What kind of rates are you going to charge customers? And so you have to have your revenues, expenses, depreciation schedules, what you own, your planned service, and all gets into your revenue requirements. You can calculate proposed rates. And then, so here's the milestone schedules. This is the important one. We're almost done with the RFP process. We want to do all this next stuff, which is going to take some time, obviously. Public involvement's ongoing, but really where we're at here today, and the reason why we're here for a discussion, if need be, after this presentation is you've got 2 ordinances on the table to basically set up the stormwater utility code. Really a skeleton ordinance at this point in time with the purpose of essentially letting this department, this new department, stormwater utility, borrow money so it can start the process of setting up the utility. And so you'll see AO 2019-88, and also, which is basically, this one is setting up the utility. It's very skinny back. later on, after all this initial work is done, there will be likely additions to this code. But right now, it's just very skinny back, and then like the second compendium of ordinance says, because the stormwater utilities separately accounted for a department and item, it needs some money to set itself up, and that's what this is for the $1.3 million ask to get this utility up and running. And those are the two ordinances on the table. And with that, I'll kind of leave, this kind of leads to some of one of Fred's questions. So here's a 40-inch, 50-inch storm drain pipe. You can see it costs money to put this in the ground. It's hard infrastructure. Behind here, you've got a large parking lot. This is like Change Point Church, I believe. They're tax exempt, but they're contributing a lot of drainage to that storm drain pipe, and they're not paying for it. So that is the equitability thing in one respect. Likewise, here's an airport area, water quality issues. Part of the stormwater utility's purpose with the Clean Water Act of '87 is to address stormwater degradation or water quality degradation too. So flooding causes water quality problems. You brought up there are OGS separators in town to make sure you collect both oil, grease, and sediment before it hits the streams. So there's all that stuff is tied to our city's MS4 permit. With that, I'll open up to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Then I got a cue, Mr. Welton, Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah. Last year and a half, I asked Stormwater Utility if we had oil water waste and separators. I was told no. I didn't believe it because it would be such poor practice. But how many of them do we have?
The answer to the question is on MOA does have, so watershed management addresses a lot of the management practice now, but they're tax funded, so they kind of fall under the new umbrella of the stormwater utilities part of the group. To answer that question, I don't know the direct answer, but there's a lot of them, and if you go on MOA's Maps and Apps website, it has maps of a lot of stormwater infrastructure, and it shows them all on there. I can pull it up, but we can look afterwards, because it might take some time to find that.
So are there 10 or 80?
More than likely the 80 around that. No, they need to be. Here's what I'll say is this permit, the APDS permit, AKS, basically the city's permit requires OGS separators in places. I don't know the exact number, but there's a lot of them.
So do they need maintenance?
Yes, they need to be cleaned out on any places.
And so is there an advantage to having many small ones or several large ones?
It all depends on your point of discharge. In other words, before you discharge to a creek or a water body, you better have one. So I don't know that there's an advantage. That stuff will be looked at. I'm not sure of the full criteria. That's part of the reason why we're going to hire the body to help us make those decisions.
And if I may continue, do we have any problems with people deliberately polluting, people pouring their crankcase oil or antifreeze down, or we used to have sewage haulers from the valley dump into.
Well, on the sewage haulers, we'll find them. We'll write them a citation because we have code enforcement on that. On the stormwater side, that's not under our purview now. That's a street maintenance would know that better than they would. Even then, they'd have to catch it. That may exist, but I don't know the answer to that.
So, are you seeing any of those kind of chemical waste in a sense in the stream, the stormwater stream?
I personally am not. I haven't asked staff from the other departments if they have, but I mean, honestly, that's part of if we would see that stuff, we would have to investigate.
Do we monitor for it?
That's a watershed management question. I don't know the answer to that yet.
Is it common practice around the country?
Well, for stormwater, if you have a funded program designated that, it certainly could. And again, it ties into the permit requirements too.
Last, if I may.
Yeah.
And so the entities that are putting together stormwater and wastewater, does that help with pollution solution by dilution?
No, that's not the solution. That pollution is not dilution is not the solution. Pollution. That's the old saying, though. But yes, I.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Welton.
So I got 4 questions. You can cut me off if there's a bunch of people still. So one, so why do we have to be under RCA with this?
Good question. We don't. It's a legal question we approached, and if we could, by setting this up in code, we could just set it up and start billing based on what we best estimates right now by a rural city. However, we've met with the RCA and asked them that question. If the municipality did that, they would like to intervene and challenge that, and then we would delay the whole thing by a year or two. So we're going for the RCA to get out this reason because we think it'll get challenged. Stormwater utilities are oftentimes challenged, as a matter of fact, both legally and by regulatory commissions. And so we figured if we're going to get challenged, we might as well go through that process now, because otherwise it gets delayed.
Yes.
So we had $450,000 that were proposed in this year's budget to get this rolling. Now it's $1.5 million.
Yeah, the good thing we delayed that decision, because the reality is that this is making keep in mind, because of the delay and by the time this is a kind of a 2-year process, a 1.5 year process. I've got that 450 was really intended for, that was the professional consulting fees essentially. But because you're going to be using existing water and wastewater utility staff to do some of this work, I can't use water and wastewater staff time unless it's funded from the municipality. So it's a high number. We think it's on near the ceiling. We don't know the exact number, quite frankly, at this point in time. I know it'll be more than 450 more than likely between the consulting fees and our labor and time. I don't know the upper ceiling, but I think 1.5 million gets us through the 2021 time frame when we first start building. That's the intent. That's why I increased.
Couple more and then we gotta move on.
So, this is important.
No, it
This is one of many important things we have to deal with. And when we didn't put that $450,000 in there, it's because we moved into a huge crisis today.
Homelessness, yeah.
Right. So, here we have $1.5 million. We sell these bonds, and if we move forward, and it's going to cost more people something somewhere. Perhaps we decide this is not the crisis of the day. We're focusing on homelessness and crime. Now we have to pay this back, and we just shot a hole in our budget at a time where our budgets, we're going to learn more.
It's a great question for the CFO.
And some of these came up, but Mark correctly illustrated a 2-step process. So the first step, we're going to hire this consultant. They're going to put together the scope of what the utility is going to look like, what the rate structure is going to look like. We're going to come back to you and say, this is what we want to propose to the RCA. And at that point, you get to say, I like it, go to the RCA, or you're going to say, I don't like it. And maybe unlikely, but you might say, I don't want to proceed, in which case the municipality eats that. Where's the money coming from? We believe from every dollar we spend from this point forward, we're going to capitalize as part of the structure of the stormwater utility, and so that when it ultimately gets approval, we're going to recapture this money through rates. So we're loaning the money to ourselves to spend it in order to build this utility so that we can put in a rate structure and we can pay ourselves back.
Okay, so kind of, because I understand that, but suppose we say, we're not ready yet, we got these other things to deal with.
Then
How
that
quickly
$500
do we-
million is functionally, we spent it, we have to find some place to get it.
And that $1.5 million could do huge benefits. in other
The $1.5 million, Dan, I think as Mark said, the original 450 was just for 2019, just to do the consultant work for this year. $1.5 million gets us all the way through application and approval by the RCA and set up for the building structure. So that's why it's a higher number. It takes us all
I
the
got
way
that, but I'm just saying, this is one of many important issues. And we may decide in a year and a half, that we're not going to pursue this now because we got these huge mega problems here. So now we got to pay it back. We just blew a hole in our budget. And how quick, like that year, we vote no, we're not going to do the stormwater utility right now. Then we have to pay it back next week.
No, we were going to set it up over time when we set this up to do it. So the interfund loan will probably be set up with some, maybe we'll call it a 5-year time frame. And then, but once the stormwater utility is set up and the rate structure is set in place, we're going to convert that to a longer-term loan to the stormwater utility. I guess what I was really trying to say is, if there shouldn't be any financial impact on the utility, only some savings if you decide to proceed, because we would anticipate that the proposed rate structure would cover both the expense it's going to cost us to borrow the money and also what is now being paid for out of everybody's taxes.
I got all that. I'm just saying, what if we say no?
Yeah.
Not going to
If
do
you
it.
say no, we're going to have to figure out how to pay back that additional money.
And that's a real big problem all of a sudden.
Don't say no.
Well, you know, it's $500,000. You spread that over 4 or 5 years.
Wait, I thought it was 1.5 million.
Well,
No. The 1.5 is we're functionally saying we're guessing because we don't know until we negotiate with a consultant. But we're guessing the consultant is $500,000. Produce a report that says this is what it's going to be. And then you say, go forward. We're going to spend another $1 million to apply to the RCA, get approval, set everything up.
But to answer your question, by the time, before we submit this application to the RCA, which is in March of 2020, the $1.5 million covers us through January 2021, essentially. Prior to that point, we're going to come before here. There's at some point before March of 2020, early in 2020, which is several months from now, we won't have spent the whole $1.5 million. We're going to come before the Assembly and say, do you want us to submit this to the RCA at this point in time? And if you say no, we're not going to spend the whole 1.5. We hope not to. There is that risk that you could, but it won't be all that money because there's a stopgap measure in several months before we submit. If you say go ahead, then we'll continue to spend that money, but it won't. That's really why this time frame criteria is important.
And I just add that for this appropriation, it's not intended to target this cash so that we can spend it wherever we determine. It's specifically for this utility, not response to the homeless services. And maybe we will do that with some other appropriation through another committee. So next is Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to quickly make a comment on what John is saying, because I do think there's significant political risk to this. And what I mean is, it might turn out this is about as popular as cat licensing, in which case it will not go forward, because I think many of us have been convinced by the sort of policy merits and the substance of it. We've gotten these presentations. Other cities have had great success with it. And it's true that we can offset some of the bonds, and so we could maybe have some long-term savings. But it's still the case that people, correct me if I'm wrong, people are going to get a new bill or a new line on their AWU bill, but probably a new bill that's going to show up they have to pay. Maybe you said it's in the order of what, it's like a few dollars a month, right? Or like $15 a month.
It varies, yeah. We don't know that yet.
But for the average household, it's not a significant bill, but it's still something.
It's noticeable.
It's noticeable. And a lot of people in my district, I can't speak for everybody else, but a lot of people in my district are not going to be thrilled with that new bill.
You can probably speak for everybody else.
I don't know. Girdwood, they're weird. They're like, hey, why don't you...
My district is asking to pay more.
Yeah. So I do think there is a real risk that we'll get through. We get RCA approval, and this body will say, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to let you do this. And reminding me that we do it, and then the people of Anchorage say this is like photo radar. We're going to put it in our charter that you can't do this, right? I mean, that's relatively unlikely. Anyway, the question I had was about federal grants. So you said this is in part so we can help comply with the Clean Water Act. And my question is there any kind of federal support for setting these kind of things up? They seem like pretty good policy. I mean, is there any pool of money from the state, from the feds, or I guess for the state too, where we could go and try to get money from them?
Well, not necessarily for startup, but for later on improvements, capital improvement type stuff. Yeah, they're not necessarily grants. If you kind of touched upon it a little bit in the report, which is very low interest loans, the state revolving fund, which we use a lot for wastewater and water has a similar type fund. You'd also have some eligibility on the stormwater side as well. You could ask DC, for congressional representation for grants. That'd be great. But they're not. They don't seem to be handing those out as much as they used to.
Well, we don't do earmarks anymore, but I'm kind of surprised that there isn't some kind of fund, because it does seem to be trying to comply with a very specific federal law. It does seem good policy that is sort of nationwide. I'm surprised there isn't some federal program to help us.
Not that I'm aware, but the reality is part of that analysis with this first phase will be we will search for that.
Yeah.
I don't, but honestly, I have to admit I don't think that free money is out there, and so but believe me, if it's there, we'll find it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So next I have Ms. Quinn Davidson, Mr. Zelta, and Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there any money that we currently use out of our operating fund to do any of this work, or will it all replace bonded money?
No, actually, the majority of it is. So right now, if you can report, I think between MOA and DOT, at least MOA spends around $20 million a year on those are annual. This is 2016 numbers. if you have the report, it's on page 24, the operational costs alone are $21 million a year. So essentially, you take that out of the property tax and shift it towards the utility rate. So there is a shift. However, just there's what you do with that savings and property taxes is that will come up. That's a policy decision. You could give tax relief, or you could spend it elsewhere.
Like on other programs, like
Sure.
homelessness.
Well, the
for
problem is
instance.
that after in 2016, when they passed Proposition 8, it means that it's a ratchet. Like you lose, the tax cap drops if you don't use the funding.
Well, but again, that argues for coming up with a comprehensive solution to some of the problems.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that later. We can't divide up the spoils until we've done the work of deciding if it's a good policy decision. Ms. Zalatil.
Yes, my question is on the timing, assuming all the approvals go through and we're going to use this $1.5 million through 2021. I guess I need a little bit help with the funding mechanism. I noticed in the memorandum or in the loan document that it indicates we're only going to pay the interest to start, and we're going to use the ratepayer or the rates to pay the principal, I presume. Or will it come like right on? Like, I guess I need a little bit help with the timing there.
So what's proposed is what's called an interfund loan. So we have many funds across the municipalities, some that have ongoing balances, and we have about, I think, 5 or 6 interfund loans outstanding for a number of projects. And so what's proposed, since we anticipate that we would set up and start charging rates, that initially we're just going to pay interest, and then the principal will pay itself back over time.
And if I may do one follow-up, are we looking at any potential funding gap between when we may exhaust our $1.5 million in 2021 before we are getting substantial enough rates that we would be able to go ahead and run the utility?
We believe the answer to that is no. And again, it's what's going to happen is the work that's going to be done prior to the application is going to give everybody in the community, including yourselves, a very clear picture of what the revenues we expect, those expenses we're going to cover. Probably between now and then we'll probably make some sort of decision about what we're going to do relative to the tax cap and those expenditures. So you will have the opportunity to make that decision, and we'll know with a fairly high degree of certainty that when we're going forward to the RCA, what our expected revenue stream is going to be. So if in fact it turns out that the expenditure it takes to go through the RCA process starts to mount, we probably might come back to you for some additional authority relative to the interfund.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. And I was just looking at the ordinance, the 2019-87. On page 4, it says that we have until October 31st, 2029 to pay this back. It says we could pay it back earlier than that.
Correct.
And also, if the federal government is trying to get municipalities to create stormwater utilities, there might be some sort of low-interest loan fund. It might not be grants available, but it could be maybe a low-interest loan fund. I don't know if that exists or not, but those type of things have happened in the past.
I think through the chair, as you said, we're going to explore this thoroughly and figure out if such a funding source doesn't exist.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm still not real clear on why we have to override the recommendation to do this as an independent utility versus keeping it in with regular AWWU and expanding AWWU even from an RCA.
To be clear, right now, Acres Water and Wastewater Utility is just that. It's a water utility and wastewater utility. It doesn't touch stormwater.
Right.
We don't spend money on stormwater because we can't. If you introduce it, you have to get the revenues to create that utility. So I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, why not just expand the reach of AWWU versus creating a new utility I mean, obviously
That's kind
those
of what
things
we're
would have
doing,
to
but
go through it.
that's essentially, we're integrating this new utility. We would call it AWWU or AWWW. You just had another W in there potentially. Who knows? That is frankly. But you are integrating that in there, but it is a separate set of books. In other words, there's different expenses and different revenues, and so it has to be accounted for separately. So we can't incorporate it just in the water and wastewater utility without having separate rates. It's completely financially separate, if that makes sense.
But don't essentially we do that anyway, because we have some people who have sewer systems that have their own water, or vice versa. So to a
Yeah, so
certain
in other
extent,
words, if you have a private
separate.
well or septic, like hillside and something, where they don't pay a water or wastewater bill, or if they have a sewer service but not, if they have a private well, they'll pay a wastewater bill only, but they're separate books. This is basically kind of what Forrest alluded to. You're going to have a third component on your bill now, and if you're only a stormwater utility, you're going to have one component to your bill, which is the stormwater fee. So that's essentially what we're doing. We're trying to utilize our existing resources for economy of scale. One billing department, one customer service department, one financial department. As opposed to right now, it's mixed through a spread of different entities, from, like I said, the DOT to the versas, and even the way after. It's kind of commingled. And like I said, one of the big things is because of that, you've got a lot of challenges that have come going over time. Passing the buck downhill, flooding, no one takes care of it at all, and so that's why having one governing body is the benefit. And it's just taking advantage of an existing municipal enterprise utility, which is a water and wastewater utility, to incorporate and integrate the third utility. I'm not sure that fully answers your question. Doesn't seem like it has, but that's the best.
Well,
I can.
thank you, if you don't mind. I guess that's where my confusion is that, is this totally separate? Because my understanding is we are creating a new utility.
We are.
Okay.
But the bodies don't change necessarily. In other words, so yeah, that's okay. What you're getting to is in the weeds. Initially, what we're going to do is we're going to take care of accounting, customer service, and billing. The work proper it'll be intergovernmental agreements between DOT and MOA. They'll still continue to do the work. All we're doing is taking on that accounting of how that's going to be expensed, taking it out of the taxes and put it into bills for utility. And it'll mature over time. It kind of explains this in the report. There's several ways to do this, but this is the least risk impact way to do that.
Can I ask a question that is related to that? We have already two utilities there. We call it AWWU, but it's a water and a wastewater utility, right?
Yep.
They're kind of two separate functions, so this is a third. So in a way, it's kind of both, as I understand it. Mr. Dyson, you have a question?
Yeah. It's kind of triggered by Forrest's question about politically risky. I hope at the end of the day, these bills have to be paid regardless. Now they get largely spread again across all property taxes. I hope at the end of the day we can say some people who are not impacting the stormwater thing will see a reduction. Those who are will be paying more, almost a user fee for the stuff. Is that at least theoretically valid?
Yes. Yeah, theoretically. I mean, there's several ways to do rates. You're right, and that is the way some people do that. The rate structure is rate design, if you will. It has various credits. Those are all possibilities and opportunities.
Let the record reflect. He said yes.
Fair enough.
And many other words.
Ms. Delato?
Yeah, to Crystal's point of question, if I understand, we have two utilities in one at AWWU, and each one of those has separate RCA approval, and in order to go beyond to do this next thing, we have to get another set of RCA approval, regardless if we call it something else or it's all under the same umbrella.
As a matter of fact, we call it AWW as an acronym, but actually it's Anchorage Water Utility and Anchorage Sewer Utility. They're two separately regulated utilities. Now we're going to have an Anchorage Stormwater Utility, or SWU, whatever we want to call it.
So it's like a big DBA. The
Yeah.
AWW is that does business as, but it's these other utilities, so it's got an umbrella and separate entities, and each one requires different RCA regulation because regulation is specific to the thing we're doing.
Correct. Service
Okay.
provider.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And Mr. Dunbar?
No, fine, thank you.
And my question is there any need for voter action?
That's a legal question. Right? The short answer is no. I don't believe it is. We're a home run. I think it's a home run city, whatever you want to call it. I don't know the proper proper terminology, but the point being is the assembly has the right to set it up. But that being said, meeting with the RCA and acknowledging there is some of the cost is we have to do public involvement because, as you all alluded to, there's a risk if you don't get public support, at least in some nature, it can fail. Now, it can fail, but the courts, like I said, most of the 1,600 plus utilities around the United States have been challenged in some way, shape, or form. Most of them all prevailed if they've done it right. Doesn't make it any easier for the voters, but.
Thank you. Yeah, that's about all. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, just a preview of things to come. I'm just going to do a prediction. I think Providence will intervene and will try to stop this. They've done it with MLMP. Right now, 4/5 of their $500 million, is more than that, $500 million capital plan is tax exempt. This they would have to pay for. And if we learn one thing about Providence is they love to, fight us when we try to make them pay for things.
That's good. That's
powerful.
The game. They are
They're very
powerful.
powerful. And
Yes.
they're very wealthy, and they hire a lot of attorneys.
And they drain a lot of money from us. So other questions or inputs? If not, then I think we'll finish this conversation. As you see, there's an item of unfinished business on the agenda, but we're not intending to take it up right now because we have a meeting on Monday, a work session. The question I have for the body and for the chair is, are we confident with this, or do we need to set up a work session in advance of this vote? Do we need more time? No. Okay, I think generally speaking, the committee's confident. So, Mr. Chair, I'm thinking a work session. And with that, in honor of, Mr. Dyson.
I have just a draft of some questions I want to get answered on the PCT thing.
Okay.
And I'm going to pass them out to you. You'll have trouble with my scrawl, but I think I'll get them typed up and better organized. But just give me a forecast of it.
Great. And with that, if there's no other questions, Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, so we're on PCT, so.
But really the intent is not to dive into this.
So if we have it on the agenda, and I don't know, is there someone here who wanted expected to have it?
No, all of the users were told that this was, literally, there's a little letter under there, intent is for the discussion move to work session. So they were all told not to be here, that we weren't going to really discuss this, but I left it on the agenda in the unfinished section because clearly it's unfinished.
Okay, I just want to make sure no one out of their day to be.
They all called and asked, should we come? So,
Is that correct? Everyone back over?
I'm going to try a third time. Mr. Dunbar's philosophy that the clock, the goal is, it's a ceiling, not a goal, a target. And so with that, we're going to adjourn this meeting.
Wait, hold on. Can we do public law?
We can. Mr. Haberman, please. Audience participation.
No comment today.
All right, thank you.
Hopefully.